live on set at Bush Pig Adventures, and we're here to talk to you about everything to do with tyres. Hi folks, and welcome to episode 2 of All Things Tyres with General Tyre. I've got my 2 experts, Lance and Marcus, with me, and in this episode we're going to be talking about what happens when you deflate your tyres too low. So we've spoken about pressure in episode 1, the importance and the risks and benefits of tyre pressure relating to principles on and off-road. In this particular episode now we talk about you off-road, you've deflated your tyre, you've gone past the line of safety. So in that context you could potentially have a tyre come off the rim, and what is the impact of that from a safety perspective. So let's just talk about pressures. What sort of pressures you need to do that, and I'm going to start with you, Lance. Let's just talk about tyre pressures going too low. Now, I think from a technical perspective, if you can maybe just explain to the audience what keeps a tyre on the rim, so the importance of pressure relating to a tyre and helping it to stay on the rim, and then let's start building towards going too low. What are we allowing the tyre to do in terms of movement and flex, etc.?
Okay, so basically I think the basic concept is your inflation pressure is carrying your load. It's not the tyre that's carrying the load, and the tyre is containing this inflation pressure, so that must be understood, which means that we have to have good fit to the rim, right? A good seal as well. I mean, we need to maintain the pressure within the tyre, and if we go too low, we have the possibility of the tyre becoming unseated. More so during an evasive maneuver, all right, if we need to make a lane change or a change in direction. However, I have seen it in a straight line as well.
So just to take a step back, you're having your tyre fitted. Many of us would have heard that loud pop or loud bang. So what is that?
We will cover that when I show you a rim, but just to basically answer the question is when the tyre or the bead of the tyre passes over the safety hump and slams against the rim flange.
So that's causing it to seat.
To seat,
okay,
on the flange.
So that's an important element for tyres to allow it to seat correctly.
Correct.
And when you take that pressure away, you have more flex, right? So like you mentioned, in an evasive maneuver, when you're turning the steering wheel, the tyre is now going to flex, but it doesn't have the load. It's not carrying the load because it doesn't have air.
Correct.
And then what happens?
Yeah. Well, it's going to flex. We're going to then put stress onto that bead area, into that seat area specifically. All right. And with that additional stresses, we can have the tyre slip over the safety hump, and the tyre will then go into the tyre well. And as soon as that happens, we really have a very dangerous situation if we continue to drive.
So now all your air will escape.
Correct.
Because it's not seated anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the tyre can move wherever it wants to on the rim.
Correct.
Okay.
And in actual fact, if you continue to drive, the tyre can become unseated completely from the rim, and then you will have rim on road.
Incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, that is very dangerous.
Okay. Thanks, Lance. Marcus, off-roading. Yeah. I'm sure you've seen this countless times. People going too low,
yes.
Not knowing where to stop. We're looking at sand. I think sand is probably where you would see it the most, because I think that's where people think you've got to go down as far as possible. As Lance mentioned, driving in a straight line doesn't always cause that type of thing to happen, but certainly when you have to steer and turn, and there's too much flex, and obviously the tyre now doesn't have the air to carry the load. Just give us your perspective. You know, what have you seen in terms of danger, risk, damages to vehicles, not only to tyres?
Okay, so in the 4x4 world, the majority of, we call it debeading, and to getting your tyre to come off the rim, happens in 2 places. It is sand coupled with speed. We deflate our tyres to give us the maximum amount of grip. Now, when you do sand dune driving, when you're playing on a sand speed track, anything like that from a sand perspective, you want maximum coverage. You want that vehicle to float across the sand. Any hard tyre in sand, and you're going to dig, you're going to sink. So the guys go down as far as possible to give them the maximum amount of grip. Now, as you go further and further down, You need to mentally adjust your speed. But now if you've got a massive dune in front of you, you can't crawl up a massive dune because gravity is always going to win. So you need to now have a balance between speed and tyre pressure. So you drop your tyres to 0.5, which is great for the sand. It's probably one of the best tyre pressures for sand. But now if you input too much steering and if you have too much speed, the amount of pressure that you're putting on that sidewall to jump over that safety hump on the rim, it can happen very, very easily. Now, it normally happens when you are crossing somebody else's tracks because it's that sudden jolt on the sidewall, and that puts so much strain and pressure. You've put in so much input to try and turn. You've got very soft sand, but the vehicle's not going where you want it to go because now you've got your diff lock on, you've got everything on. So that diff lock is pushing you straight, but now you want it to turn, and it's not turning, so you put in more input. Where else can you put input? On your accelerator.
Yeah.
Now, by putting that in, you're putting a lot more pressure, a lot more stress on those front wheels. You hit that sidewall on another person's tracks, and that is when you end up debeading. When it does debead in sand, it's going to force you to keep going straight, okay? Because you just run out of all steering, you run out of everything. Now you risk taking the tyre completely off the rim. You're going to get sand in the rim.
Yeah.
You're going to get sand on the bead. It becomes quite a process. Now, if you don't know what you're doing and you don't have the right equipment, it can become quite a strain and stress to change your tyre.
And we'll be talking about that and all the equipment necessary in a future episode. And I think that's a very important point that we can certainly park. But in terms of damage, now we'll see tyre damage from that type of thing and vehicle damage, possibly.
If you keep driving, definitely you're going to get vehicle damage because the tyre is going to degrade, it's going to come apart, and you're going to start getting the tyre hitting against the bodywork of the vehicle. You don't want that. Rim damage, depending on the terrain you're driving on. If you're just in soft sand, you're not going to get a lot of rim damage. But if this happens in a rocky section where you have serious angles of the vehicle and you have deflated too far, and just the sheer weight of the vehicle is pushing down on that bead and it's forcing the vehicle down to the side, anything can happen.
Yeah.
And if that bead pops off on a rocky section when you are at serious angles, it could cause you to roll. On gravel roads, if you have deflated too far and you take a very sharp corner at high speed, you're heavily loaded, you've got all your worldly possessions in the back and you're down at half a bar, 0.6, or you haven't noticed that you've got a slow puncture. Now you do an evasive maneuver or you take a corner too fast, you're going to debead because you don't have the correct measures in place to make sure you know what is happening with your tyre pressures. And there are things out there that can help with that.
So folks, please stay tuned for the next episode where we'll be talking about the difference in tyre footprint between a standard manufacturer's recommended pressure. When you're going off-road, obviously you want lower pressures, as we've been discussing, and we're going to show you the impact of the footprint as you deflate from higher pressures all the way down to lower pressures. So please stay tuned, it's an important episode. We'll see you then. Thank you.